Good morning, my dear friends, or wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to our pre-Pesach lecture titled The Essence of the Haggadah. We are now just days away from Pesach. A few days ago, somebody called me with a question. Now, this time of year, there's a lot of questions, a lot of technical halachic questions about how to prepare for Pesach. Can I kasher glass? How do I clean my kitchen? How do I clean for Pesach? What's the right amount of matzah? What's a good wine to buy? A Haggadah? A lot of important questions, how to prepare for Pesach. But somebody called me with a very interesting question. He said, Rabbi, I have a problem. It's bothering me. Last year at the Seder, towards the end of the Seder, I was with my family. Thank God he could be with his family during COVID. He had young children. And at the end of the Seder, they made the ceremony, the proclamation, which everybody makes at the end of their Seder. And he said, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. He said this with his wife, in front of his children. And now he's just days away from Pesach, and he's not in Jerusalem. And he has no plans to be in Jerusalem, unfortunately. Maybe he can't even get there to be in Jerusalem. And he's asking me, what does it mean? He said it last year, he said it the year before that. All his life he's been saying that. It's never come true. And it's not just a wish. It sounds like more like a guarantee, a proclamation. We're going to be in Jerusalem. And furthermore, the Seder night is the penultimate night of education. We're talking to our children. We're modeling behaviors and ideals that they should be believing in and living by. The most important thing in our education and communication to our children is honesty. If you're going to say something, you got to come through with it. If you make a threat, if you make a promise, make sure you come through. Because if your words are empty words, what does that teach your children? And so with the rest of his children, he says, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year we're going to be in Jerusalem. And it wasn't even true. And now he's asking me, furthermore, he's hesitant about saying it at the Seder night this year because he feels like he made a mistake. He feels like he robbed his children of something that they were promised. How could we have said last year? How could we say again this year, next year in Jerusalem? Now, that's a very good question. And that's a very important question. And it's somewhat of a difficult question, which I hope by the end of today's class will have satisfactorily answered. Arguably, the Seder night of Pesach is possibly the most important night of the whole year. Yes, there's the night of Rosh Hashanah, the night of Yom Kippur, the night of other festivals, the night of your spouse's anniversary, or their birthday, or your children's birthdays. There's many important nights and evenings during the year. But the Seder night marks the anniversary of the beginning of our story, of us as a people, the birth of the Jewish nation. And so we get back to basics. And we talk about the experience of slavery, the experience of Exodus, redemption from Egypt, and the emergence as a nation, as a people, as a free people. And everything else from all the festivals and the traditions and the customs and the Torah and our history and our own family occasions are all a result of this landmark historic event on Pesach night. So it's a very important night. And so we better make sure we get it right. It's one chance a year that we have. Now, of course, you're not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be perfect. And don't hold yourself up to a standard of perfection. However, let us try to prepare and talk through some of the important issues that we can give it our best shot to our children, to ourselves, our loved ones during the Seder night. What I want to do with you is focus on the Haggadah. The Haggadah is the liturgical text that we all recite at the Seder. Some of us recite more of it, all of it, some of us a little less. It's a very long work. It's been compiled over centuries, some of it already going back to the times of the Talmud, and some of it later, towards the 8th, 9th, 10th century. And it came about, and it's a lengthy text. And it's full of stories and Talmudic teachings, historical anecdotes, instructions. It's a very thick work, and it's very interesting. It's fascinating. We could study it for a very, very long time. But with all the different tidbits and all the different pieces of the puzzle, what I want to explore together with you is, how do we nail it down to what is the essence of the Haggadah? If we had to put into a few words, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? What is the central message that we want ourselves to learn and our children to be able to hear? What would it be? It's true, our children come to the Seder with all their different commentaries and explanations and stories and pictures and props and diagrams that their teachers prepared for them. Fantastic. And we have to give them the space and the time to share all that. And it's great. But what would be, in a nutshell, the crux, the essence of the message, the story, the goal of the Haggadah? And I want to share that together with you now. A wonderful teaching. I'm dedicating this class in honor of the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose birthday is today, the 11th of Nisan. He was born in 1902. And we're going to get to a teaching that he taught at a very awkward time of the night. It was about 2 a.m., approximately in the year 1966. And I'll tell you soon more about the background of that story. But to get there, I want to explore some of the Haggadah texts with you. And we're going to use them as a springboard to create our conversation. The link to the source sheet, which are the texts we're going to be studying from, is in the video description. So download the link, download the source sheet, and we're going to begin. So as you can see on your source sheet, the first source is a source from Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch was written by a great early medieval commentator, Rabbi Aaron of Barcelona. And he created a work where he enumerated all the 613 mitzvot, and it's very nice actually what he did. He says what the mitzvah is, and then the shoresh ha-mitzvah, where the mitzvah comes from, where it's rooted in the Torah, and then the yesod, the foundation, the explanation behind the mitzvah. And there's a brief passage on every single mitzvah with a kind of explanation about what it's about. In mitzvah number 21 is the mitzvah of recounting the story of Exodus on the night of the Seder, the night of Pesach. And he writes there a very powerful expression, which is quoted very often ever since. He writes that the commandment to recount the Exodus from Egypt is to tell about the Exodus from Egypt on the night of the 15th of Nisan, each person according to their power of expression, to Lord, to praise God. May he be blessed for all the miracles he performed for us there. And then he says, and I bolded the text, but this is the line. It is no wonder if there are many commandments that came about this, positive commandments, negative commandments, since it is a great foundation and strong pillar in our Torah and in our faith. And therefore, we always say, in memory of the Exodus from Egypt, in our blessings and our prayers. He's pointing out something really interesting and intriguing. So many times in our prayers and our kiddush, we say the following words: Zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim. We're performing this to remember the Exodus from Egypt. And this is in our prayers, and this is many mitzvot we perform. That's the memory. Why is that the memory? Why don't we say, Zecher l'maseh bereshit, to remember the creation of the world, or to remember the creator of the world, or to remember that God gave us the Torah. There's so many equally important landmark events in our history, yet we choose the Exodus as the reason and the memory and the intention behind many of the mitzvot we perform. Why? So he says, above the other very important events in our history, the Exodus from Egypt is a great foundation and a strong pillar in our Torah and in our faith. The giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, very important. Entry into Israel, very important. Building of the temples, very important. Creation of the world, very important. Our patriarchs, our matriarchs, very important. But not as central as the Exodus from Egypt. So think about it, therefore, what we're dedicating ourselves to on the night of Pesach, which is recounting the story, is touching on the very foundation and pillar of our faith and identities, which is why this is the story that I want to explore together with you, because it touches to the core of who we are, where we come from, and what we're trying to be and to do. Now, a theme or a code about the Haggadah you should know, which provides a bit of background, is how was the Haggadah composed? What is the nature of telling the story? So in fact, the Talmud already asks the question, how do we tell a story? How do we tell the story of Exodus? And this is the great question that all speakers ask. And how do you communicate a story? that it should be interesting, intriguing, relevant. The audience should listen, full of suspense. How do you do that? So the Talmud gives a formula, which probably many movies and many shows and many documentaries and many series that you're watching have used this formula. Whether or not they know it, it comes from the Talmud. So it was given already 2,000 years ago. And the formula says, Matril begnut u'mesayem b'shvach. Begin with the bad, begin with the harsh, begin with the negative story, begin with the trouble and the complications and the difficulties, and conclude with the shvach, conclude with the happily ever after story. That's how to tell a story. You begin with creating suspense, and there's a fear, and there's a scare, and there's an issue, and will she live? Will he live? Will they get out of this? Right? The mess that they're in, and end. It's got to end on a happily ever after note as well. So the audience leaves happy, and they were engaged, they listened, and they came out with something uplifting. And that's the model for the Haggadah. So I want to study a few passages, 5 passages with you briefly. And these are the passages that are, I would say, most central to the Haggadah. Like I said, there are many passages, but these 5 are most central. The first one is the opening passage when we begin the Magid part of the Haggadah. Magid is recounting the story. So we've made Kiddush, and we've washed our hands, we've dipped the vegetable into the salt water for the karpas, we've broken the matzah for the yachatz, we've hidden the afikoman, and now everybody sit down, relax, we're about to tell the story, and the story opens up with Hey lach ma'anya, or some people say Ha lach ma'anya, or some say Ke ha lach ma'anya. Now, this is an interesting way to open up, because the very next passage will be the questions from the children, the Ma'anishtana. And the questions really should be the opening part of the Haggadah, because the instruction, and this is another key element in how to tell a story, how to educate. The best way to educate our children, our students in the classroom, is not to provide and inform them with information, but rather have them ask questions and respond to their questions. Think about this. Do an experiment. Imagine you're in the park and there's a lot of people there. You walk over to some stranger and you say, "Hi, my name is Eliezer." And you walk away. Now take somebody else and have a conversation with them. And let's say in the conversation they ask you, "By the way, what's your name?" And you say, "Oh, my name is Eliezer." That's my name. Now come back an hour later to the first and second person. The first person you just offered that information to, he didn't ask for it. Ask them, "Hey, do you remember what my name is?" In all probability, they're not going to remember. Walk over to the second person who you were having a conversation with, and they asked you for your name and you gave it to them. Ask them now, an hour later, "Do you remember my name?" They'll probably remember. Why? What's the difference? Very simple. When you ask a question, you're like creating a space in your brain. You've requested that information. So you've allowed for some kind of neural space and pathway to receive that information and process it. And therefore it remains with you. Versus if you didn't ask any questions and you're just busy in your own world, on your phone, your book, or whatever, and somebody just runs up to you and throws you some information, it's going to come as in one ear and out the other ear. Why? Because I never asked for it. So I never created space in my brain for it. I never worked on processing it. So it came and it left me. So if you want our children, our students to really retain the knowledge that we're giving them, they can actually process it, learn from it, grow with it, teach it to others. We have to have them asking questions, which is like the Socratic method in education. And it's so important. Teachers who are doing just a lot of frontal teaching and just offering information, it's not so effective. It's much more effective to engage the students, pique their curiosity, get them energized, involved in the conversation, and then the information they store much better. Which is why the whole Seder Haggadah story is supposed to be a response to their questions. So they ask questions and then we're responding to them. However, this passage comes even before their questions. What does the passage say? Let's read it together. Source number 2. "This is the bread of poverty that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt," pointing to the matzah. "Anyone who is hungry should come and eat. Anyone who is in need should come and partake in the Pesach offering." We don't have that anymore, but we have a nice meal. "This year we are here. Next year we'll be in Israel. This year we are slaves. Next year we'll be free people." How how does this paragraph make any sense? What is the context? Why is it here at the very beginning, the introduction to the Seder? Say there is a night to dedicate, to memorialize and recall the redemption. We were slaves, but we left Egypt. And how do we open up the Seder? How do we open up the night of freedom? We point to the matzah and we say, this is the bread our ancestors ate in slavery. Why are we talking about slavery? We want to talk about redemption. Slavery is behind us. We want to forget about it. And then we're saying, whoever's hungry, come and eat. This paragraph, don't be mistaken. This is not a true, genuine invitation to people to come to your meal. It sounds like it, but it's not really. Because if it's an invitation, why are you saying it half an hour into the Seder? You should have said this before you began your Seder. Or if you were more honest, you should have said this in the synagogue. When you had guests around you that could have come to your home. Or you should have said it days before, weeks before, if you really wanted to invite anyone to your Seder. Now you're in the middle of the meal and nobody's there and you're saying, hey, everybody come and eat. So we must say, on a deeper level, this is much more than just an invitation. Something's being communicated over here. But what are we saying? Now we're slaves. Next we'll be free. Now we're in exile. Next we'll be in Israel. Again, why are we focusing on this if we're trying to focus on redemption, on liberation? Now, you may want to put on your thinking hat and you may want to argue, respond, and say, didn't I just say earlier that the methodology of recounting a story is to begin with the bad and end with the good? So this phrase, now we're slaves, next we'll be free, now we're here, next we'll be in Israel, is following that pattern? No, that doesn't answer this question. Because that formula works when you talk about a bad, harsh, challenging, difficult, messy event in the past. But now it's happily ever after. That's an empowering story. That's an inspiring story. But the story that you tell that you say, now we're in a mess, now we're in a harsh situation, and hopefully in the future things will change, that's not an inspiring story. No one's going to walk away from that feeling uplifted. You got to talk about the past as a mess and the current as the bright redemption and the happy story. So what kind of introduction is this? How is this setting the tone for redemption when it seems to focus on everything else but redemption? Moreover, we're saying, this is the bread that our ancestors ate in Egypt. Hold on a minute. That's the source, the reason for the matzah bread? Later on, we're going to point out the Pesach, the matzah, the maror, and we're going to say clearly, this matzah bread, why are we eating this tonight? Because when our ancestors were being redeemed from Egypt and they put the dough in the oven to bake, but God said, we got to leave right now. So there was no time for the dough to rise. And therefore they took out their matzah crackers instead of their leavened bread. And so that was the food they ate as they were leaving Egypt. It's the food of Exodus. That's why we eat it. And here at the beginning of the Haggadah, we're saying the exact opposite. It's not the fruit of Exodus, it's the fruit of slavery. But it's not. That's not the reason. Why are we talking about fruit of slavery anyhow? So there is a famous commentary that says, actually, the Jews did eat matzah in Egypt. Pharaoh, the Egyptians, fed the Jews matzah as well, as slaves. Why? Because matzah is cheap. It's just flour and water. And also, it lasts a long time in your system, as you probably know. So it's a good way, it's an economical way, maybe a torturous way, to feed slaves. But they did eat matzah in Egypt, and therefore we could be reflecting on the matzah they ate in Egypt. But first of all, many commentaries disagree with that and say there's no record of that. That's just made up, possibly. We don't even know if that's true, if they really ate matzah in Egypt. So there's no record of that. And more importantly is, again, if we're trying to tell the story of Exodus, why are we talking about their diet as slaves in Egypt? And why don't we stick to the script, where the script says later, the matzah is the food of Exodus. So why are we talking about the food of slavery over here? Those are the questions in the very opening passage of Helach Ma'anya. Let's continue. The children ask their questions, and then we start to give response. And the response is the very beginning of recounting the story. And remember the theme, the formula is starting off with the bad, ending with the good. So when you start off with the bad, what is the beginning of the bad, challenging story? There's actually an argument in the Talmud how far back we should go. One opinion says Start off with the story of slavery. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt land. That's the beginning of the harsh story. There's another opinion in the Talmud that says, no, go even further back. In the beginning, long before the slavery, even before our patriarchs and matriarchs, we used to be idolaters. We were pagans. We worshipped other gods and idols. We didn't know about or believe in one God. And then came along Abraham and his wife Sarah, and they discovered one God. So we all go all the way back to reflecting and remembering how we were a pagan nation, pagan people. The world was a pagan society. And thank God we evolved and we changed from there. So those are the two passages we're going to read out now that reflect on those two opinions, but we're going to once again encounter a number of questions. Let's go to source number 3. Avadim Hayinu, the first response to the children's question. Why is this night different from all other nights? That's their question. So what do we answer? Because we were slaves to Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And the Lord our God took us out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched forearm. And if the Holy One, blessed be He, had not taken our ancestors out from Egypt, you should know we, our children, and our children's children would all be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay, so that's why this night is different, because we're recounting the slavery. But what are we saying here? We're saying that the Lord our God took us out, and He had to take us out with a strong arm. Without that, we would not have made it out. In fact, if He would not have taken us out in 2021, you and I, our families, we'd still be there. You believe any of that? Is that even true? Not only is it almost unbelievable, it's actually contrary to the script of the Torah. Many years earlier, when God made the covenant with Abraham, called the Brit Ben Abtarim, and God told Abraham, I'm going to give your descendants the Holy Land of Israel. But before I do that, your children and descendants will be enslaved in a foreign nation for 400 years. And after 4 generations, they will return back to Israel. This is the promise, the covenant that God made with Abraham. See, it was destined. It was guaranteed. It was for granted that there was a decree. We're going to have to be slaves, but we'll eventually get out after 400 years. And here in the Haggadah, we're saying, if He would not have taken us out, we would still be there. No, we wouldn't. The decree ended after 400 years. And moreover, why did we need God's mighty outstretched arm to take us out, as if God was doing some miraculous intervention to get us out of there? We didn't need any major intervention. The same God who decreed we're going to be slaves, now the decree is finished. So we should almost naturally have just walked out of Egypt, because the time is up. The bell rings and slavery is over. So what does it mean we would still be there? And why was it necessary to have God's outstretched arm intervention? Now, you may want to say, the truth is, we were not in Egypt for 400 years. We were in Egypt only for 210 years. So it seems the decree was shortened because of God's great kindness. So for that, we needed God's outstretched arm and God's intervention to end the slavery 190 years before it was decreed. It's not true. It's not a good answer. It was still a 400-year count of the decree. The question just became, where does the count begin from? We thought the count begins from when Jacob and his family come down to Egypt to visit Joseph to get food, and they start to live there. And from there, it was only 210 years. We're making a mistake. The count of 400 years begins from the birth of Isaac, the son of Abraham. For whatever reason, the numbers and the count changed. There was still a 400-year decree. It just began earlier. So therefore, by the time we left Egypt, the decree was up. We did not need any major intervention. We didn't need a miracle, seemingly. And what's to suggest? How could you suggest that we would still be there till today? Passage number 4. The next reflection on a harsh beginning, which I mentioned earlier. Mitchila of day avodah zarah. In the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshippers. And now, right, that was Terach, the father of Abraham, and He actually was an idol merchant, as you know the story. Abraham destroyed all the idols, and he told Terach, the idol destroyed the rest of them, right? He really refuted and mocked their whole pagan belief system. So that's how we used to be. However, the Haggadah adds, and now the Almighty has brought us close to his worship. And it brings a verse from Joshua, where over the river did your ancestors dwell from always, Terach, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they worshipped other gods, but since then we've become monotheistic believers. Here's a question. And now we've become monotheists? Now in 2021, we're saying the word now? Not now. It began a long time ago. It didn't just begin even with the Exodus from Egypt. It began, as we're stating over here, with Abraham. Abraham was thousands of years ago. Right then began the journey of monotheism. Why are we saying in Haggadah, we used to be idolaters, but now we're becoming monotheists? Furthermore, what are we saying? And now, not we're becoming atheists, monotheists, we're starting to worship God. We have eradicated idols from our faith system and our societies, but it says, and now God brought us close to him. God brought us into a lifestyle of monotheism and of faith. God brought us? I mean, what does it even mean that God brought us? We did it. Abraham discovered God. We worked hard to believe, to learn how to believe in God. It was the effort of the people ever since Abraham, and it's been an evolving effort. Why the importance, or why even the need to focus? What's the meaning of focusing that God brought us close? We came close. Every word is precise. We need to understand. I know I'm throwing out a lot of questions. There's 2 more paragraphs, but then we're going to try to piece all the pieces together. And it's going to be something so gorgeous and so beautiful. Source number 5. In the middle of the Haggadah, there's a turning point. We talk about the Exodus. Some people stand up, some people raise their glass, and we sing together. V'hi she'amda lavotenu v'lanu. What do we say? This has stood us for our ancestors and for us. Meaning, it's not only one person or nation that has stood against us to destroy us. In every generation, they've always tried to destroy us. But the Holy One, blessed be He, rescues us from their hand. V'hakadosh baruch hu matzileinu miyadam. A beautiful prayer, a very true prayer. In 2021, the Jewish people, in the state of Israel, all over the world, we've seen, thank God, not so recently, but we've seen synagogues being shot and all kinds of anti-Semitism. It goes on all the time. We are just 2 generations away from one of the greatest, worst massacres, holocausts in Jewish history. However, here's the question. Is this a song, a prayer that's unique to Pesach? First of all, Pesach is dedicated to talking about the slavery in Egypt by Pharaoh and the redemption. We have to up that story. That's the highlight of the night. Let's not distract ourselves from that story. So we make a prayer and we say, don't be so taken aback that we were slaves to Pharaoh and God freed us. It happens all the time. It happens in every generation. There were pharaohs, there were Nebuchadnezzars, there were Tituses of Rome, there were crusades, there were inquisitions, there were Nazis. It happens all the time. That's very true, but that's not what we should be saying on the Pesach night. Pesach night, don't take away from this crisis. It happens when there's a crisis in society, chas v'shalom, when there's a shooting in a synagogue. And then the conversation should be about anti-Semitism. And then we start to talk about, other intolerance of other minorities. It's an important conversation, but that's not for now, right? When there's an issue of racism and Black lives, unfortunately, are hurt. And then we start to talk about anti-Semitism, same argument. It's true, but not for now. Now let's focus on the crisis for tonight. So while we're reflecting on this, the fact that all the time there are these crises in the Jewish nation. And also, by the way, another question is, this doesn't seem to be a unique prayer about Pesach. We should sing this prayer every festival. Purim, we were saved from Achashverosh, from the Persians. Hanukkah, we were saved from Antiochus and the Greeks, the Assyrians. All the festivals we were saved, we should sing the song. On Purim, in the middle of the party, we should stand up and sing. Right? Why? Specifically, Pesach. Let's study one final passage together. At the end of the story of the Haggadah, Messiah B'Shvach. Now we're talking about the happily ever after story. And we say the song of Dayenu. Illu, illu, hotziyanu, hotziyanu, mimitzrayim, la 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 la, Dayenu. What is the song? Gorgeous song. Song is, dear God, thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. Because you didn't have to do it, and you did it. And you could have only just done A, Dayenu, be enough. But you did A and B. If only just B, Dayenu. But you did also C. And so we end up and we say, Dayenu, it would have been enough, any of those miracles, but look what you did. Let's read through all those miracles, at least some of them. How much more so is the good, the gratitude to you, God, doubled and quadrupled, that the Holy One, blessed be He, bestowed upon us. He took us out of Egypt. He made judgments with them. He punished the Egyptians. He made them with their gods. He killed the firstborn. He gave us their money. He split the sea for us, brought us out of dry land, pushed our enemies into the sea, gave us all our needs in the desert for 40 years, fed us manna, gave us Shabbat, brought us close to Mount Sinai, gave us the Torah, brought us into the land of Israel, and built us the chosen house to atone upon all of our sins. Beautiful prayer. Sing it and sing it again on the Seder night. However, two questions. For all of the miracles that we're mentioning, we don't explain the reason, the purpose of the miracle. We just state the miracle. God fed us manna. God split the sea. However, when it comes to the final one, God built us the chosen house, which is the Bet HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem. We explain its purpose was to atone for all of our sins. Why this one gets an explanation and the other ones don't? Something to think about. Furthermore, what kind of explanation is this? Was the whole purpose of the temple just to atone for all of our sins? It may have done that, but the temple did much more. In fact, the Torah itself says, build a temple for me, says God, v'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell in it, I will dwell among you. The purpose of the temple was to bring down a revealed state of God's presence here in our world. Gilui HaShekhinah, revelation of the Shekhinah. That sounds like it's much more than just atonement for sins. In fact, atonement for sins is only applicable to some people, to sinners. But the bringing down of the Shekhinah is for everybody to enjoy and to benefit from. So why didn't we say, if we're going to have to give a reason anyhow, why didn't we say, and God built us the temple through which He revealed Himself to us here in this world? Another question. Why is the name for the temple, which is normally Bet HaMikdash, holy home, holy house, but here it says Bet HaBchira, the chosen house? That's not a word we normally use for the temple. The word chosen is about Jerusalem. God says, you'll build the temple in the space that I have chosen. But we don't normally call the temple the Bet HaBchira, yet here it's calling it with a unique name, the chosen house. And finally, one last question. How many of these miracles were actually relevant and important and necessary for the Exodus? All of them, except the last one. Took us out of Egypt, punished the Egyptians, drowned them in the sea, split the sea for us, fed us manna, gave us money, gave us Shabbat, brought us to Mount Sinai, gave us the Torah. That's all part of the Exodus story. Receiving the Torah was the ultimate goal of the Exodus story. Even bringing us into Israel, the second to last miracle, was the culmination of the Exodus story. As God says in the Torah, I'm going to take you out and redeem you and take you, right, which He promised and fulfilled with that. And the last word is veheveti, and I will bring you to Israel. So I can't just take you out of Egypt and leave you trapped nowhere. I have to give you a home, give you Israel. So at that point, coming into Israel, that was the culmination, that was the end of the miracle story of the salvation from Egypt. Building the temple, as nice as it was, as important as it was doesn't seem to be an intrinsic part of the Exodus story. It's moving along. It's the next phase of the Jewish people. Building the temple and many other phases that followed after that up until today. but it doesn't seem to be part of the Exodus story. And yet here, it's the final miracle being mentioned as part of the salvation from Egypt. How do we make sense of that? So, we have just dissected the whole Haggadah together. I hope you're following along. And we've focused on the main paragraphs of the Haggadah, and each one of them we've found a lot of questions. How do we make sense of anything over here? These questions and more are not questions that I discovered this year studying the Haggadah, even though when you learn the Haggadah, some of them just fall in your face. But these are questions that were raised once at 2 a.m. in 1966 in 770 Eastern Parkway, Brooklyn, New York. In those days, the custom was, nowadays when you finish your Seder, midnight, after midnight, you're exhausted, you're tired, you're half shikar, half drunk, you're full, you just want to collapse. You don't even have energy to clean the table until your wife or your mother or somebody says, 10 more minutes of cleaning. But back in those days, in the 50s and the 60s, on the second night of Pesach, after everybody finished their Seder, there was a Farbrengen in 770. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to give a Farbrengen and teach Torah. It always began at 1:30 a.m. So it wasn't a huge crowd, but lots of people would gather at 1:30 in the morning for a Farbrengen. Now, there was no eating, no food and drink, because you're not allowed to eat and drink after you finish the Seder. But there was a lot of Torah. The Rebbe would teach, often teachings on the Haggadah, teachings on the festival, and it would sometimes go till 3, 4 in the morning. And at 1966, this year, was a very unique Farbrengen, and a lot of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe actually closed his eyes. When the Rebbe teaches Torah with eyes open or eyes closed, it's very, very different. Often the regular talks were eyes open, but the Maimarim, the Hasidic discourses, the very deep, profound discourses, almost like channeling words of God through his mouth, they were eyes closed. Eyes closed was when the Rebbe went into great tzaddikim, go into a trance. Their souls are half here, half up there. Eyes are closed, and they're channeling divine information and energy. So this this particular Farbrengen was taught with eyes closed. And in that teaching, 2 in the morning, the Rebbe raised all of these questions that I've just asked and more. And it's a published talk, and you can look there, and there's many footnotes. It's a very deep Talmudic, but we're soon going to find out Kabbalistic, esoteric talk as well. And at the end of all the questions, the Rebbe said, now let's piece it all together. And he offered this unbelievable, revolutionary path into an approach, how to understand Seder, how to understand Pesach night, and what is the story of Exodus and the story of our people. The Rebbe did 2 things. On the one hand, it seems like he downplayed the story of the Exodus. And on the other hand, what's the opposite? He upplayed, he magnified the story of the Exodus. And it's the balance between the two that creates the package of the more external, superficial way of viewing how things were, and then the deeper, more central way of understanding how things truly are. And it goes like this. The first thing the Rebbe said is as follows. When you come into your Seder and you have your children, before you start the Haggadah, before you start even recounting the story, even before the Manishtana questions, right away, seeing everything going on, family, the guests, the whole scene, a child has many questions. A child looks around and says, I don't understand what's going on. What are these questions? The first question the child says is, I don't understand. I've been learning for weeks in school that we were a liberated nation. There was Exodus from Egypt, no longer slaves. Now we're a free people. That's what my teachers taught me. That's what my parents taught me. That's what we're about to read in the Haggadah. That's what this whole night is celebrating, that we're not slaves anymore. We're not in exile anymore, and we're a free people. I don't understand. Look around us. Look at our world today. We're still recovering from a plague that has killed thousands around the world. It made many people ill, many grieving families. There are still a lot of enemies in the world. There's still a lot of anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, intolerance in the world. Nations are fighting with each other. There's a lot of threats to people. There are murders. There are criminals. There are challenges. You call this the freedom that we're celebrating? I thought we left Egypt. I'm told we left Egypt. Everything should be good. I don't see everything as good. I see I had to stay indoors with a mask, and my parents were warning me. And I see people who go to hospital, people get sick, people suffer, people lose their jobs. I see nations suffering. Our land of Israel isn't having the easiest of times. Never has. What happened to the Exodus fairy tale story that I was told? That's a basic, simple question number one that a child has. Question number two. The Exodus, the story the Torah tells us, that God says, he told this to Abraham, in fact, when your children after 400 years will leave Egypt, they're going to leave a wealthy nation, which they did, right? They took all the gold and silver out of Egypt, whether during the plague of darkness, they took a lot, and then by the splitting of the sea, and when the Egyptians drowned, they had all the treasures floated to the shore. The promise was fulfilled. We left with wealth. And the point of the wealth wasn't just to live a greedy, materialistic life. The point of the wealth is that you can actually build a nation, build an army, to protect yourselves, build homes, build infrastructure, build community, so you can be a sovereign nation, a free nation to live responsibly, to live out your mission in this world. However, that wealth didn't last forever. In fact, the child looks around. There's probably at your table, maybe not this year because of COVID, but generally, there's probably at the table, a poor person, a needy person. Maybe your own parents, the child's parents, had to get helped from a fund, a tzedakah, in order to make Pesach this year. Or you know that your parents sent a check to somebody to help them for Pesach this year. There's a lot of needs in this world, a lot of causes in this world. A lot of people have a struggle, especially this past year during coronavirus. The child says, we were promised great wealth, but we didn't have it. So many people, so many needs. What happened to it? I'm just reading the text of the Torah, and it's not even true. In fact, in the opening passage of the Haggadah, like we read earlier, we say, whoever is hungry, come and eat. Whoever is needy. Why are there hungry and needy people still in this world? We call this redemption. And finally, the child says, what about spiritual wealth or spiritual poverty? When we came out of Egypt, we're told, only 1/5 of the Jewish people left Egypt. 4/5 stayed and died in Egypt. Those 4/5 were people who refused to believe in God, refused to believe in redemption or in Moses. They basically became Egyptians. And so they died together with the Egyptians. So when we came out of Egypt, the few who did come out were believers, were faithful people, dedicated to the cause, committed to God and the Torah. That was the whole nation. Well, up until today, it should be that way. The entire Jewish nation should be this nation of our ancestors, committed, dedicated to faith in God and the Torah and doing what we're given a mission to do. Look around. A lot of people who forgot about God, don't know about the Torah, may not even be at a Seder on Pesach. Could you imagine? Yes, there are such people. So the child says, what happened over here? Where was the breakdown in the story? Why did it change? Which link was it? How did this come about that we have Jewish people, brothers and sisters, that are not connected and engaged with the Jewish story and the Jewish mission? How does this come to be? These are the big questions that a typical child, an honest, free-thinking child, has right away before he starts the Seder. And these are big questions which we need to answer to the child. So what do we tell the child? We tell the child as follows. Listen carefully. First, we start off with the opening paragraph of Haggadah. It's not yet the story of Exodus. It's not yet the response to the questions of Manish Tana, but it's an opening paragraph. The Haggadah is the introduction. It's setting the entire tone and theme of the night. How is it doing that? Well, we point to the matzah and we say, this is the bread of poverty that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. That's the answer. That's the key to the whole story. How is that the answer? And we ask questions, remember? Why are we talking about slavery? Talk about redemption. It wasn't even the bread of Egypt. No one even knows for sure if they were fed matzah in Egypt, but this was the bread, the food of liberation of Exodus when they went out of Egypt. So the answer is, Of course, the matzah is the food, is the bread we ate coming out of Egypt on the night of Exodus. And it's symbolic of the Exodus because we were in a rush to get out of Egypt and there was no time for the matzah to rise. Nonetheless, we're still calling the matzah the bread of affliction, the bread of eating in Egypt. We're calling the bread of redemption that we left Egypt with, that we ate in Egypt. Why are we saying that? We didn't eat it in Egypt. We ate it outside of Egypt. You know why we tell the child? You need to know something. It's a very, maybe a difficult, but a truth. And you can handle the truth. Children can handle the truth more than adults. We tell our child, you should know that we left Egypt. You should know that God redeemed us. You should know we became liberated from the Egyptians. However, we were never entirely, completely, fully liberated. The redemption was not the penultimate complete redemption. Even after we were redeemed and left Egypt, we're still in exile. We're still slaves. This matzah, that is the bread that we took with us out of Egypt, because of the liberation, it didn't have time to rise. We're still calling it the bread, the food of Egypt. Because even coming out of Egypt, we're still stuck in Egypt. And in fact, you should know, 3,333 years later, which is today, we're still not 100% redeemed. We were taken out of Egypt, but not completely. We're still in the middle of the story. Now, what's the big celebration then? We're gathering together, we spend so much money, invite all these guests, make a beautiful Seder to commemorate Cherut, freedom. We recline, we drink the wine, the matzah, the good food, all the nice dishes on the table. That's very anticlimactic. We were redeemed, but we're not really redeemed so much. We're still slaves. What's the celebration? The celebration is, as the great Maharal explains, on the eve of Pesach night, when we were taken out of Egypt, we were given a special gift from God. It's called the gift of freedom. God allowed us to begin to live as and become a free people. That's a big thing, to be a free person. A free person who not only is not enslaved by another human, a free person who is free to determine their life, to determine their decisions, to choose how to act, how to respond, how to live, to make the right choices, to live the moral life, life of truth, life of honesty, not live the distracted life of greed and power and money and all the other distractions. It's a gift. It's a gift we were given. But freedom doesn't just come on a silver platter and it's guaranteed. And freedom is not just something that's given to you and it's over. Freedom is a tool you could be given with, and it's an unbelievable gift. But it comes with a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of responsibility. Never take freedom for granted. It doesn't just happen like this in your life. You need to partner with God. You need to take this tool that you were given and make it happen in your life. You need to work on your life and work on yourself to be able to learn how to, that tool can change you, can define you, can condition you, can transform your life. So this great celebration of the Seder night is we were given the tool, the gift of freedom, which is an unbelievable gift. And it allowed us to actually live a meaningful, purposeful life. We didn't become a free people. We've had to work on it ever since. And that's what we've been doing. And for the past 3,333 years, till tonight, till the Seder, guess what? We're still in the process. We're still working on it. But we're not 100% free. We're still somewhat slaves. Now, why? Why couldn't we get freed 100% from Egypt? Why are we still slaves? Why is this journey so long? The answer is as follows. We need to understand the spiritual background behind the evolution of events, the spiritual background behind the whole slavery. Why did God tell Abraham that your descendants will be slaves in Egypt in a foreign land for 400 years? Why? sounds sadistic, it sounds cruel. I mean, if God made it happen, he could have stopped it also, prevented it from happening. It wasn't like Pharaoh is stronger than God. God predicted, he decreed it should happen. Why? The answer is as follows. What was the point of the slavery in Egypt? There's a midrashic teaching that says that God turned to Abraham one day and God told Abraham, you have a choice. I have to punish your children, one of two punishments, and you can choose which one. One is Gehenom, purgatory, hell, or the other is Galut, exile, slavery. You make the choice. And Abraham chose slavery, exile, over Gehenom, over hell. From the fact that God is offering one of the two means the two of them would have achieved the same thing. They have the same nature. What is the nature of purgatory, of Gehenom? We Jews don't believe in this eternal hell. You just burn forever. The point of Gehenom is to become refined, is to become purified, is to become cleansed. If in your life your soul has become sullied through sin, through bad behavior, Gehenom cleanses you, purifies you so you can get into heaven. So Galut, exile, which is the other choice that God gave Abraham, is the very same thing. The point of the exile, the slavery, was a cleansing process, a purification process. And why the need for cleansing and purification? What was the sin? Let's go back to the beginning of time. On the sixth day of creation, the first day of the creation of mankind, Adam and Chava, God gave them one test. The test was, don't eat from this tree of knowledge of good and bad. Eat from every other tree. And they failed. Chava convinced Adam, they both ate from the tree. That mistake, Torah tells us, got them ejected, thrown out of Gan Eden. But on a broader, more spiritual level, what did that mistake do? That mistake infused and injected into the world a tumult, a complete mixing of forces of good and bad, forces of right and wrong. That injected an impurity into the world. At the beginning of creation, when Adam and Chava lived in Gan Eden, they were living in this perfect world, holy world, spiritual world. Everything was as it should be. Everything was right. Everything was correct. Everything was in order. That sin injected the spirits of impurity, of tumah, of klipa into the world, and everything spiraled out of control from there. And all bad and all evil and all negativity and all suffering comes from that. And so the moment they're thrown out of Gan Eden, begins a process of tikkun. Now we have to fix the world, repair the world in order to bring it back to its original state. It was created a perfect world. We mucked up. We've got to bring it back to be a perfect world. Now, the process of tikkun did not begin right away because actually for many generations, there was worse and worse harm and damage being done to the universe. The Medrash says that there were 7 generations of damage to the universe. The sin of Adam and Chava took the Shekhinah, took God's presence and elevated it, removed it from the world to the first heaven, which allowed for the injection of impurity into the world. Other sins like Cain killing his brother Hevel, and Enosh, and the sins of idolatry, and the sins of the building of the Tower of Babel, and the sins of the generation of Noah, they each took the presence of God to a higher, more removed from the world, first heaven, second heaven, until God's presence reached the furthermost place, the 7th heaven, which meant that our world was devoid of godliness, and a lot of impurity and a lot of the negative energy could fill our world. And it's at that point that, thank God, Abraham walks onto the scene. And Abraham discovers God together with his wife, Sarah. And from that discovery and worship of God and helping others with that same discovery, the Medrash says, Abraham merited to bring the Shekhinah back from the 7th heaven to the 6th heaven. And then Isaac to the 5th heaven. And subsequent generations all the way down. So Abraham began the process of tikkun. He began the process of the repair of the world. And so God turns to Abraham and says, thank you for beginning the process of repair of my world. And I want you to know now that your descendants have to either suffer or live through Gehenom, purgatory, or through Galut, exile. And the purpose of that is to bring the ultimate cleansing to the world, the ultimate repair that'll bring the Shekhinah back into this world and eradicate and remove the forces of impurity, the powers of negativity and harm, and will restore the world back to how it was pre the first sin, like it was in Gan Eden, the beginning of creation. That was the point of the exile, cleansing and purifying. And the plan was that after 400 years in exile, the process will be over. The world will have been cleansed. All of the idolatry and paganism and forces of evil and brute powers of might and greed would have been eradicated from the world. And a new wave, a new breath of monotheism and of truth and of fairness and peace and equality and love and kindness will fill the world, like it'll become a world of perfection like it was. And then when the Jews leave Egypt after 400 years, they're going to have a redemption that's going to be the Messianic redemption. The story is over. The world has been repaired. That's how it should have been. For some reason, it didn't work out according to the plan. Egypt was a harsh exile, but it did not achieve full cleansing and full purifying of the Jewish people. Which is why we say that were God not to have redeemed us, we would still be there. We would not have been redeemed. Meaning, the point of the exile was to bring the world to a state of perfection and bring about the Messianic redemption. Well, 400 years was up, and that didn't happen. In fact, we're told Jews were still steeped. Many Jews were steeped in the idolatry and the ways and the immoral ways of the Egyptians. In the lowest levels of Tumah, the 49 levels of Tumah, which we cleanse ourselves in the 49-day count of the Sefirah, leading up to receiving of the Torah. The Jews were not deserving of redemption. The world wasn't ready yet for redemption. It wasn't ready for Mashiach at all. It was not cleansed as it should be. It wasn't ready to be restored to Gan Eden. If that's the case, then the exile should have continued for as long as it would take, because the whole point of it was to cleanse the world. And it's only because of God's great kindness and powerful, mighty arm did he intervene and say, even though the plan was that this exile should lead to the Messianic redemption, I see it's not happening, it's not working out. Well, I'm not going to let my children stay there forever because Nebuch, they are suffering. I'm going to bring them out. God needed to bring them out. It would not have happened naturally. And when they came out, the process didn't end. They weren't slaves to Egyptians anymore, but they were still slaves. They were still in their own spiritual Egypt because the process of repair was long from being finished. In fact, it's still going on today. You may ask, well, one second. The decree was for 400 years. It wasn't just that this exile should bring to Messianic redemption, but there was a time limit, 400 years. No, 400 years is up. So it should have just automatically been redeemed. But here's what happened. You recall, many times after the Jews left Egypt in the desert, and there were challenges. They didn't have food, and for some reason they forgot that God can make miracles, even though he made 10 more miracles in Egypt. He made a miracle. He gave them man. He gave them meat, the quails. He gave them water from a rock. He could do anything, right? Of course he's going to protect them. He surrounded them with clouds of glory, clouds of protection. But the Jewish people kvetched. They complained all the time. And many times they reached a bump in the road and they said, we want to go back to Egypt. We remember the delicious fish and the foods. We remember how good life was in Egypt. Hard to believe they said these things, but they did say these things. And they said, let's turn around and go back. Now, it never happened. They never actually did turn around and go back. But why? Because Moses said, no, that's not the plan. Moses is one person. The Jewish people were 2 million people, approximately. You don't think 2 million people can overpower one person? Moses is this Nebuch. Moses is stuck. He's the messenger of God. He has to stick to the script. But we don't want to starve and die. We want to go back to Egypt. So many times they could have turned around and gone back. Why didn't they? So the answer is because God took them out of Egypt. Their redemption from Egypt was not earned by themselves. They were not worthy of redemption. They were still steeped in the lowest levels of impurity. They weren't on the level to be redeemed. But God gave them a gift, the tool of redemption. And because that was God given to them, God injected within them the power of redemption, that stopped them from ever being able to go back into Egypt, which is the great celebration on the night of the Seder. In fact, I'll just share with you an amazing commentary in the Haggadah, because we saw this during the Holocaust also. How did the Jews fall so low? They were Jewish people. They had a connection with God. I mean, they were descendants of Jacob and his family, his 12 sons. They fell so low. They became pagans and idolaters and steeped in levels of impurity and possibly murderers. I mean, who knows how a slave lives just to survive? So we read in the Haggadah, the Torah says, Vayareu otanu. We translate that as the Egyptians did harm to us, did bad to us. But the Hebrew should have been Vayareu lanu, if they did bad to us. Vayareu otanu means something else. The Egyptians made us bad. The Egyptians turned us into something lousy and filthy and despicable and immoral. That's what slavery can do. The Jews were stooped to a level that they on their own would never have reached, so low, but the Egyptians did it to them. Such a harsh condition of exile, if you look into stories in concentration camps during the Holocaust, and stories, there's a lot of heroic stories, but there's a lot of stories of Jewish people who behaved in really not nice ways to protect themselves, to harm others. We don't have to say these stories, but they're true. And anyone, chas v'shalom, we never judge. But more than never judging, you have to understand why this happened. This person, ideally, naturally, could never have behaved the way they behaved. How did they behave so despicably, so horribly, so selfishly? It was another effort and torture of the Nazis. The way that they treated the Jewish people in the camps, the way they treated them, dehumanized them, turned them into beings, into humans or dehumans that they would never have become on their own, which was the tragedy. It's the tragedy of any state of torturous exile. So now I've answered a lot of questions. We understand now why we're calling the matzah the bread of Egypt, the bread of Exodus, but we're still in Egypt. And we understand why we're saying this year we're here, next year in Jerusalem. Next year we're slaves, next year we're free people. We're still not in Jerusalem. We're still slaves. We're still here. We're still not 100% free people, because the story of repair, the story of tikkun that began with Abraham to restore all of the sins at the beginning of the history of the world is still going on. We're still working on achieving the Messianic redemption and the complete restoration of perfection in the world. And so we say that had God not taken us, we would still be there. It's true. We would still be there because the whole goal of the exile was to bring to the Messianic redemption. And if it hasn't happened yet, we have to keep going through the process in Egypt. But God intervened and took us out because he said, I can't do this to my children. And we say that now the Almighty has brought us close to him. What do you mean now he's brought us close to him? Abraham became close to him. Abraham became close, but it wasn't like he became close and then from then on the Jews were always close and redeemed. No. A process began but never ended. Even now, we're still in the same process that Abraham was busy with, trying to repair and restore the world. And God brought us close to him, meaning on our own, we wouldn't have got there. It's the kindness, the gift of that God gave us, of that tool of redemption, that tool of freedom that we are using on this process to finally restore the world. So this is the first message that we're giving our children. A long message, right? You'll find an appropriate way to teach it. But the message is as follows. Yes, we were freed, but not 100%. Yes, we became a free people, a potential free people, but we were still in exile. We did not yet finish the process we were there for, and we're still in the middle of that process. So the child looks around. Why is there so much disaster in the world, crisis in the world, enemies, hatred, violence, poverty, people who have not discovered God, not discovered the Torah? Why this illness, plague? Why is it all happening? It's all happening because the world has not yet been restored back to perfection. The world is still imbalanced with the forces of impurity. And you, we tell our children, you are part of this story. And hopefully you are towards the end of the story. After 3,333 years, it could be ending very soon. We've come very far. Compare the state of the world in general to how it's always been. The levels of protection and food abundance and technologies and nations who are, where we're holding today is far greater than we've ever been in world history. So we're getting there and we're almost there. And we tell our children, you're the next link. You could finish off the whole story that began with Abraham, could be finished with you, and we'll see the ultimate, final, Messianic redemption. One last piece of this puzzle. It's worth staying for this one last piece. This is all a sort of a downplay on the story of Exodus. But there is another angle to the story, upplaying, magnifying the story of Exodus. This whole explanation is treating one level of connection between Jews and God. But there are several levels of connection. This teaching that we have just given, is seeing the Jews as servants of the master God, or possibly even children of the parent God. And so servants and even children have a servant has a more distant connection from God. It's not an intrinsic connection. A child is much more intrinsically bound with their parent. A servant needs to earn their stay. Right? And they could do harm. They can violate the terms of their service. They could do something wrong, and then the master is upset with them, and then they have to earn their pay and earn their stay. Even the child is much more connected with the parent, and the child on a certain level can do no wrong, meaning a child is a child no matter what my child does, I still love you, right? There's an unconditional level of love that a master to a servant doesn't have. That's a conditional love, conditional employment. But a child is always a child. But even then, if a child does something wrong, violates their parents, you have to make amends, even that. So we're saying that the Jews back in history brought a chaos into the world. There was sin, and the sin rejected God out of this world and brought impurity into the world. And now the world is imperfect. Now we have to repair all this. Now the Jews had to do their process. And in exile, they were supposed to do the process. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. And they were steeped to the lowest levels of tumah, of impurity. And they were not deserving of being redeemed. But nonetheless, God did them a favor and redeemed them to allow them to continue the journey and the process of repair. Right? That's the whole explanation. There is, however, another angle, a much deeper angle, which is the essence of understanding the story of Exodus. And it goes like this. On the deepest of levels, a Jew is not a servant of a master. A Jew is not even a child of a parent. A Jew is much more than that. A Jew, their soul is one with God, a piece of God. There's this quintessential bond that connects a Jew with God. We are God in a way. Be careful about saying that, but we're a piece of God, the human manifestation in this world. That is the most essential, deepest, unconditional bond that we have with God. On that level, you can do no wrong. No sin is a sin. You're just one, unconditionally. Nothing can separate, nothing can distract, nothing can detach you from that connection with God. Nothing can get in the way. And when God chose to take the Jewish people out of Egypt, he also exercised, on a deeper level, he exercised that power of discovering the essential bond we had with God. And he made what we call bechira. He made a choice. Let's talk about bechira. Bechira chafshit, free choice for a moment. What is free choice? We talk about it a lot, but what is it? If I offer you an apple or a candy, which one do you want? And you choose one or the other, you didn't make a free choice. It wasn't a free choice. There was reasons why you chose one or the other. So there were compelling reasons. There were all kinds of reasons and rationales and logic that influence your decision. This is sweeter, this is less sweet, this is healthier, whatever it is. There's a reason why you chose one over the other. You didn't have to use the power of choice, the power of a reason helped you. But if I say, this is full, this is empty, but if I offer you, take a bottle of water, how are you going to choose one over the other? There's no logic. There's no compelling reason that one should gravitate you more than the other. There might be. One's in the left, one's in the right. You're thinking of the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere. You're standing. There may be reasons one's close. So that's why it's not a perfect example. But in general, how would you choose one over the other? No reason in the world, no logic in the world can get you there. You're just going to make a choice. From the essence of your soul. You just chose one or the other for no reason. Now, here's the irony. Here's the catch. When you choose something for no reason, your choice, your bond with that decision is stronger than when you choose something for a reason. If I chose something for a reason, I was compelled, I was influenced, something pressured me to choose that way, my choice, my connection, my conviction with that choice is only as strong as the reason. And if the reason gets weaker or no longer relevant, then my conviction is no longer there. But if I've chosen something for no reason other than I choose, meaning I've dug into much deeper than my mind or my heart, because my mind or heart could not make a choice. There was nothing intellectual or emotional that could influence me more to one or the other. So where did I choose it from? From the essence of my soul. I just made that choice. Well, once I make that choice, and this is it. If this is the one, for how long will this one be the one? How strong will this one be the one? Forever. It's an essential bond. What can change in the circumstances that it would weaken the bond, the conviction? Nothing could change because it was never chosen because of a reason. When God chooses the Jewish people, he's creating this essential bond with them. In other words, there's a level where Jew, non-Jew, Jew, Egyptian, on a more external level, Jew versus Egyptian, having a choice. Of course, the Jew is ultimately a God-fearing person, committed to the ideals of monotheism, of a good life, of a fair life, justice, peace. The Egyptian is just a pagan criminal. But there's a higher level, a deeper level, where there's no difference between Jew and Egyptian. Ultimately, you're the same human beings, and at the end of the day, it's possible for you to be given the same conditions, you could turn out the same way. So why am I choosing Jew over Egyptian? Because. No reason. Not because, no reason. An essential choice. And once you've made that choice, how strong is that choice? How strong is that bond? For how long will it last and endure? Forever. Strongest power of choice. God created this essential bond between us and him. On that level, do we need to deserve to be redeemed? Do we need to be deserving of redemption? Can we do anything wrong that could place doubts in God's mind? Maybe we should not yet be redeemed. No. Those are all the dynamics within the lower relationship between us and God as servants, as children. But as being quintessentially bound with the essence of God, those are not dynamics. It's just pure oneness. It's a level of love that is unconditional. If two spouses could ever achieve that, that would be amazing. I'm not sure if two human beings can ever or should ever achieve that. That's for another time. And so we tell the child, you know why God took us out of Egypt? Previously, I told you, God took us out, even though we weren't deserving, but he did us a favor. We were on a journey. It's a process of repair, of redemption. We're getting there. We're still in exile. But I'm going to tell you another reason. On a deeper level, God took us out because we're one with him. He loves us unconditionally. We could do no wrong. Of course, we're deserving of redemption. And you know where this gets taught and expressed to us? When he brought us into Israel. What was the final miracle that we mentioned that he did for us? He built us the temple. And we call the temple Bet HaBechira, the chosen house. Normally, the Bet HaMikdash. But we're talking about the Bechira, the level of choice that God made in us. So we refer to the temple as Bet HaBechira. And what's the ultimate reason for the temple? Not only to bring the revelation of God's presence here in this world, even though that's amazing. We say more. L'chaper al kol avonotenu, to atone for our sin. How do you atone for a sin? On a lower level, you got to work hard. You have to do teshuvah. You have to do repair in your life. On a deeper level, just the nature of your bond with God, that itself atones for the sin. The atonement doesn't have to come from any effort of our own, but the atonement comes from the revelation and the discovery of our oneness with God. And on that level, that's our real truth. And when we tap into the real truth, every sin falls away. It doesn't stain us, it doesn't harm us, it doesn't even exist if we can tap into that. So we tell the child, there's two things going on over here. There's this interplay of two dynamics. In a way, this is a bit of a spiritual explanation of the methodology of the storytelling we said at the beginning. The beginning we said, how do you tell a story? You start with the harsh, start with the negative, and you end with the happily ever after story. In a way, in the answer we're giving our children, we're giving two answers, two levels. On the one hand, the more external level, the more superficial level, the way we are as servants and as children, and the whole level of repair that we need to be doing. And our redemption right now is not a complete redemption, but we have the gift of redemption, but we're working on it till today. On the other hand, treasure the fact that God chose you and he created a bond with you that is complete oneness, and that you can be one with God, and you have the power with the Torah and with that connection to live as you should be in this world, completely free. Nothing can ever get in your way. Nothing can ever stop you. Nothing can ever prevent you. Nothing can ever traumatize you. Nothing can ever challenge you, because you are one with God and you are naturally, intrinsically free already. A very powerful message. And that's the culmination of the Haggadah. And the truth, it happened in an evolutionary way. At the Exodus, we were discovering the lower connection with God, how we are not yet fully redeemed. We're working on it. We're in the process. We're getting there, but we've got a lot of work to do. 40, 50 years later, or a few centuries later, we enter into Israel, and we eventually build the temple, in the times of King David. At that time was revealed the deeper inner connection that we have with God. True oneness, which tells us we are innately, truly free people. And that answers all our questions. And that is the story that we tell our children. And that's the explanation that was given 2, 3 in the morning in 1966. Imagine. So, to summarize, it's a big night, the Seder. We have lots to teach our children. But the most powerful gift that we can teach them is to tell them how important they are. Not just to us as parents, how important they are to the community, how important they are to the Jewish people, how important they are to all of humanity, how important they are to the entire story of history. And this process of history that began with Abraham, the process of repair, and it was heavily achieved in Egypt, but not yet finished. And we've been into Israel and exiled out of Israel, and back into Israel and exiled out of Israel. And it's a story of building and destruction, salvations and exiles, ups and downs. And many of our ancestors suffered. And there's been a lot of evil and a lot of negativity and a lot of bad, a lot of impurity in the world. And a lot of good and a lot of blessing, a lot of technology, a lot of salvation, a lot of helping. And it's all coming together at this pivotal moment. In 2021, I want you to know, my dear son, my dear daughter, the key is in your hands. You're growing up in a world, needs a lot of help. You're here to fix it. You're here to help rebuild it. You're here to bring the final redemption. And you are created by God because God loves you. You are one with God. You are innately, quintessentially a free, redeemed person. You should know that nothing and nobody can get in your way, and use those tools of freedom, that gift of freedom, to build your life and to help others build their life, that this world should indeed become a free world, a liberated world. And the end, we'll realize the end of the story, the Messianic Redemption. No more pain, no more hunger, no more illness, no more plague, no more sorrow, no more death, no more suffering, no more lack of parnasa. Everybody should have what they need in an abundant way. We should be able to help others. And together we will achieve the true Messianic liberation of this world. And so when we said last year, the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, I hope that today you are in more of a Yerushalayim state than you were last year. I hope today you've become a little more redeemed than you were last year. I hope today you have helped the world become a little more redeemed than it was last year. So yes, we are in a quasi-state of Jerusalem, meaning we're in a bit more of a revealed place, a redeemed place than we were last year. But we're not yet at the end. We're not yet in the promised land. The world has not reached its promised land. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, let's pray that indeed next year, or possibly this year, the ultimate experience of being in Jerusalem and having the Messianic redemption where the world has been fully repaired and fully restored to how it was in Gan Eden at the beginning of creation, so that all evil and negativity will be eradicated. May it happen through our efforts. May God help us. May God bless you all. Have a Chag Sameach v'Kasher, a very festive Pesach, a Kasher Pesach. Enjoy it. Succeed in all your efforts. God should bless all your efforts. I'll meet you soon in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim Habnuya. Chag Sameach, and God bless you.